These battle lines being drawn. Nobody's right if everybody wrong. When people speak with their mind, getting so much resistance from behind. We got to stop the children. What's that sound? Everybody look, it's going down.
Hello, everyone. This is Lauren Steiner, and welcome to tonight's edition of The Robust Opposition. I am very happy to be here with two special guests who have been on my show before, and they are David Dayen, the Executive Director of the American Prospect, and Branko Marcetic, who is a staff writer for Jacobin and the author of last year's book, Yesterday's Man, The Case Against Joe Biden. So Dave, before we get started, I want to tell the audience something, that today you won the 2020 Hillman Prize for magazine journalism for your series Unsanitized, which chronicled our year of COVID. So congratulations on that.
Oh, well, thank you very much. It's a great honor.
Unsanitized was the series that preceded the series that we're talking about now, which was called The First 100. Which you're chronicling the first 100 days of the Biden presidency. I want to open up with a general question for the both of you. Biden has surprised me by governing a little bit more left than I thought he was going to. And I want to know if you guys agree. And if so, what do you think is causing it? Do you think it's the times that we're in? Do you think it's he didn't want to be like Obama and not get anything done? Do you think it's because of the leftists that he put into his cabinet? Or do you think that he's just not as ideologically centrist as we all thought he was? Let's start with you, Branko, since you wrote the book.
Yeah, I mean, I've been surprised as well. I looked through decades of his career, and you know, the guy that we're seeing as president now is pretty different to the guy who was a senator all those years, who kind of almost reflexively would kind of appeal to the right and kind of try to appeal to what he felt were Republican sensibilities. It was really good to see that despite some kind of token outreach that happened in regards to the stimulus bill towards some of these Republicans who wanted to make a deal, in the end, they passed the stimulus bill on a party line vote, which is very unlike Biden, who is, you know, you might say the consummate institutionalist. So that has been good. I think his basically saying we're not going to care about the deficit, we're not going to worry about the debt for the moment. I think that has been good as well, and that's a sharp change from really the entirety of Biden's career from about 1977 or so. Whether that's going to last is a different question. I think already with the infrastructure bill, he's said, he's kind of sold that as this is a measure that is going to pay down the debt in the long term, and it's not nearly as big as it needs to be. So we are seeing a bit of that old Biden creeping in. But yeah, I mean, I think those are two really big things where you're seeing him shift from his previous stance. And as for why it's happening, I think it's a combination of all the things that you cited. I mean, I think the left, progressives, activists, they deserve a lot of credit for shifting the center of gravity over the last 10, 20 years. And particularly over the last 4 years as well in the Trump. And I think also it's the immense crisis or series of crises that's facing the United States and the world that's kind of making it impossible not to go big. When even Donald Trump, who basically governed as a Reaganite Republican, ends up signing a eviction ban, that means even someone who's historically been pretty conservative, Joe Biden, he's going to end up doing some stuff that is pretty out there in terms of his history.
How about you, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with some of that. I think that certainly Biden historically has been a figure who represents the dead center of where the Democratic Party is, and to the credit of many activists, the dead center of the Democratic Party is now further to the left. I think that, let's say two things. Number one, the if there was one job that a president had in these first 100 days, it was to get this vaccine rolled out. Biden came into office. I believe the President Trump was averaging about 700, 800,000 shots a day as he left office. Now we're at well over 3 million, so he's increased that fourfold. Today we passed the 200 million mark in shots over the first 100-day period. It's probably going to end up around 225 million. That, to the extent that Biden had one thing to do, which was the most important thing from a public health and economic perspective, that was it. And so that was an accomplishment. Everything else is just really, and even the vaccine rollout is really temporary. There's nothing in the American Rescue Plan, which is one of only 7 bills that has actually passed under Biden. There's nothing in there that it goes beyond about a 1 or 2 year period. And it remains to be seen whether sort of the most wide-reaching parts of that bill, which would be the increase and expansion of the child tax credit and making it an advanceable monthly credit, as well as the increase to Obamacare subsidies to increase affordability on the insurance exchanges, remains to be seen whether that's going to be made permanent at all. The infrastructure plan, as Branko correctly identifies, is something that has to be paid for, in the sense of there are these offsets. Now, certainly the offsets that are being proposed, like corporate tax increases, have a logic of their own in terms of them being something that's inequality reducing and promotes, I guess, a certain social cohesion. But there is certainly kind of the old offset trap that we're being lulled into, and we're already seeing Democrats negotiating with themselves on that. Initially, it was a 28% nominal top tax rate for corporations, and now that seems to have been whittled down to 25. So that's ultimately, if the package has to be paid for, that's going to reduce the ambitions on the spending side. And so we have no idea what that's going to end up looking like, and it could prove inadequate, and certainly it's ambitious to begin with, but the details are extremely lacking on the infrastructure package, and we're just going to have to wait and see in terms of what that is. So, Biden had identified several crises that were going on: the COVID crisis, the associated economic crisis, a racial equity crisis, and a climate crisis. And while the COVID crisis, I think, is being worked on pretty determinedly, I'm not sure that we have much to go on in these first 100 days on the rest of it. Some narratives have changed, but I'm looking at the actual policy, and I'm looking at the actual executive actions that Biden has taken, and I'm not sure that we can fully say that there's been a transformation yet.
Well, you have another column called Executive Tracker, in which you had laid out from the beginning 77 actions that Biden could have taken. And I just checked today, and there were only 8 of them that were done fully, 3 partial, 4 not done, and 1 that is no longer applicable. Do you want to talk about that just a little bit? Some of the key things that you think people would want, or progressives have wanted, that he could have done, not obviously all 77, but some of the key ones.
Yeah. We started this in September of 2019. We called it the Day One Agenda. We looked at all the different things that the president can do without new legislation from Congress, because we anticipated the fact that Mitch McConnell was either going to be in control of the Senate, or he was going to have a significant enough faction to block any major legislation from happening outside of the budget reconciliation process. And that's exactly the position we're in. We have a 50-50 Senate. We have Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema determined not to move forward with ending the filibuster. And so there's a limited legislative capacity from Democrats by their own design. I mean, I'm not saying that this is something imposed upon them, but they refuse to change the filibuster, and they refuse to, on a party line, pass these items. So ultimately, we were going to have to look to executive action if we were going to make progress. And the good news was that we identified just a host of things that presidents can do based on previously passed legislation from Congress. So there's complete authority within the law to take all these actions. And it's a number of things like canceling student debt, for example, lowering prescription drug prices, descheduling marijuana from the list of controlled substances, a whole host of things on climate, host of things on banking regulations, host of things on housing, and just on down the line. As you mentioned, we identified 77 different discrete actions, all of which would, I feel, make a serious difference. And we've only had 8 of them go forward. I guess the debate around student debt has been sort of one of those high-profile executive actions. And Biden first said that we're going to do a study, a legal review at the Justice Department. Then they were going to do a policy review at the Education Department. And anytime you're doing a review in Washington, you're not doing anything. You're setting up a process to delay and deny. And that's what Biden has been doing on student debt, and on other things, he's just been silent. So my look at it is that if you want to be a successful president in this day and age, you have to use all the tools at your disposal to make that progress. And there are certain key tools that are just being left in the toolbox.
I want to get into some specific policies, but let's talk about something that people were very fixated on, $15 an hour, and how that was in the original package, and how the parliamentarians said that, oh, you can't have that in there. And Kamala Harris was like, okay, but everybody knows that she was reporting to or listening to Ron Klain, who was listening to Joe Biden. Joe Biden campaigned on $15 an hour. Why do you think he didn't have this fight?
I mean, part of it might be, again, that sort of institutionalist aspect to him, listening to the parliamentarian, not wanting to challenge that. I mean, another thing is that it may well have been that he was looking at, he wanted to have a smooth run for the bill and not have this big fight with the party. Obviously, there was this resistance to the $15 minimum wage in there from conservative Democrats. I think that's part of it as well. I mean, I think that aspect of it, him failing to push for that, was one of these things you can point to where Biden may be more progressive than he has been in his entire career up to now. He may even, to some extent, be governing in a more bolder way than Obama was, but it shows you that sort of just being more progressive than the last guy, or being more progressive than you have in your career, is not necessarily enough for this moment. As David pointed out, a lot of the stuff that was passed in the stimulus bill, I mean, actually all of it really is temporary. There's nothing that is a permanent kind of fundamental changing of the structure of the economy, which, I mean, the $15 minimum wage isn't necessarily a massive restructuring, but it is a pretty big shift. I mean, that would have raised the pay for, I think, 32 million Americans. It would have given them a raise of something like $3,300 each for people who are on the minimum wage. So that is, that may not sound like a whole ton of money to some people, but if you're on the minimum wage, if you have kids, that is a pretty big difference. And the failure to pass that is, I think, shows you the limit of, yes, maybe because of the moment, maybe because of the energy on the streets, because of the energy on the left at the moment, people have been able to kind of wring out as much as possible from Joe Biden in this current moment. But at the end of the day, to really meet headlong all these crises that are kind of just collapsing into one another, you have to go a lot bigger than just simply kind of beating your prior record.
Now let's talk about another issue that people on left Twitter especially are beating Joe Biden over the head about, which is kids in cages. And the fact that there's more kids in cages even than when Trump was president. Now, part of that has to do, of course, with the fact that people think he's going to be more humane and more kids are coming over. But there are also things that you wrote about, Dave, that you were very disappointed in, such as the 15,000 refugee cap and the fact that he hasn't even been processing the ones that could be accepted. Can you elaborate a little bit about that?
Well, it's two separate items. So let's start with the border. So the reason that we have seen this additional influx of unaccompanied migrant children is because of a program known as Title 42 and changes to that program. Under Title 42, under Trump, basically anyone that crossed the border was allowed to be immediately expelled, no matter if they were seeking asylum, no matter if they were trying to come through that process. It was a streamlined way to get rid of them, and it was under a CDC order that said that for public health reasons we can expel all immigrants immediately. This essentially shut down the border at the end of the Trump administration. The one change that the Biden administration did was say that, all right, we are exempting children, unaccompanied children, from Title 42. Everybody else is being expelled in the same manner that they were under Trump. In fact, this increase in the numbers at the border is really an artifact of people being immediately expelled and then coming back over and over and over again. There's a lot of double counting going on at the border. However, children are able to go through. So you do see these instances of families coming to the border and then telling their children go, because they know that they are not going to be immediately expelled under Title 42. So this is something that the Biden administration, through their policy, really helped to create. And you know, I don't disagree that we should be turning away children at the border. I don't think we should be turning away really anybody, or at least not in the way that they're doing it under Title 42. But there was kind of a real degradation in the capacity of the border authorities to process and house children, because for a year they didn't have to do it. The Trump administration was just kicking everybody out. So, you know, it's a difficult situation, but it's one that the Biden administration's policies has exacerbated, frankly. Now, the refugee situation is a completely different animal than what's going on at the border. What's going on at the border is governed by different authorities. It's set in motion by different groups, even though the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is an office within the Department of Health and Human Services, is the agency that resettles these migrant children to their families or to other sponsors as they come across the southern border. It's a completely different part of that office that is vetting very carefully refugees who are in camps all over the world. There are millions of them. The conditions are deplorable, and allows them to come to the United States. Biden made a promise during the campaign that he would significantly increase that cap tenfold, actually, from 15,000, which is the lowest point that we've ever had in the history of the refugee resettlement program in the United States, which is where it was under Trump this year, his fiscal year, to 125,000 in the next fiscal year. And Biden says as a bridge, he would make it about 62,000 in a mid-year review, which only needed his signature. Literally, his signature could save tens of thousands of refugees from overseas who are in really harrowing conditions right now. And he not only promised it, he sent emissaries to Congress to tell them this is what we're going to do, to outline the strategy, and and he did this in February of this year. And then he just sort of waited for 2 months. And finally, it came out last Friday that he would not raise that cap at all. There was apparently concerns, and it seems like Biden himself was driving this process. We have new reporting on that, that concerns that because of the situation at the border and the way it was being fear-mongered by the right, that you could not raise that refugee cap and let refugees into the country, which is ridiculous. There are two different setups. There are two completely different procedures. I think this is one of the more shameful parts of the Biden first 100 days, personally. But there was a lot of pushback to this last Friday, enough so that later that day, Press Secretary Jen Psaki had to come out and say that, okay, there was misunderstanding. There wasn't a misunderstanding, but that's what she said. There's a misunderstanding, and we are going to raise the cap before May 15th. There's now a new deadline. And, you know, I mean, this just sort of kicks the can down the road. But it does show what we talked about at the beginning of this, which is that the left and the activist community does have the ear of this White House when they protested vociferously. And it wasn't just the left, it was pretty much everyone in the Democratic coalition, from Dick Durbin to Pramila Jayapal to every immigrant rights group. And when those concerns were made to the president did shift. I mean, you could easily have imagined a situation where that wouldn't happen, where the president said, this is the decision I've made and I've made it, and that's done. But there is a channel for listening to the activists in this particular administration. So while ultimately this is an unsatisfying result, and we'll see what happens on May 15th, there was this opportunity to push back and actually change the policy.
What has been the pushback, if any, to the fact that he broke his promise that he was going to stop building the wall? And we now find out that he's still seizing land. There was a case last week from, I think it was the Cabeza family, that he's seizing this land and presumably to build the wall.
Yeah, he hasn't built anything, but he's continuing the Trump policy of using eminent domain to seize various parcels of land along the border that would be presumably used for border wall construction. I mean, activists believe that all the existing walls should be torn down. It's ineffective. A $5 ladder can get across this border, this wall, which costs $1 million a mile or something like that. So the ask is really even far beyond don't build it at all, which is what Biden said he would do. It's tear down this wall. But by continuing the policy of eminent domain, it should raise eyebrows, and it is a broken promise in that sense. I think that Biden has shown that he doesn't have sort of the real drive on immigration policy the way that he seems to on economic policy, even on racial equity policy, whether it's because of the coalition that he built throughout the campaign or whatever. These policies have been half produced, not fully rendered. It looks like business as usual. They're just sort of going through the same motions in terms of what we're talking about here with the Justice Department and these eminent domain programs. It just seems like this isn't a big priority for him.
Yeah. I want to go to Branko because I want to shift a little bit over to foreign policy. We'll get back to domestic policy in a minute, but you know, he's really governing very old school as far as, you know, he said we were going to get back in the Iran deal, and now he's posturing. I don't know if this is because of Israel, but he's basically saying Iran has to stop enriching the uranium, which they were doing before Trump got out of the Iran deal. And Iran is saying, no, you have to end the sanctions. It's silly posturing. So Iran, he's really playing hardball with. Russia, he's playing hardball with. China, in a major way. We've turned China into a really huge boogeyman. And these are two countries that we need to be getting along with. And, you know, his whole explanation is we have to prove that, you know, a democracy is better than autocracy. But really, autocracy is kind of cleaning our clock when it comes to, you know, providing for the people, industrial policy, even a lot of climate regulation. But his approach to foreign policy does not seem to be fitting to the 21st century. And I wanted your reflection on that, Branko.
I mean, I would say if Biden has been surprisingly better on domestic policy than people expected, on foreign policy, he's been surprisingly bad. I mean, worse than I expected. The Iran deal is a really good example of that. Of course, the US should be the one that is immediately making the first concession. It was Trump who completely tore up that deal, violating it, then pulling out, then assassinating one of Iran's most respected leaders, without really a proportional strike back from Iran. So really, the U.S. it's up to the U.S. government to make the first step there, to actually prove that they are willing to strike a deal rather than just continue to play these sort of games. On China and on Russia, it kind of feels like Biden is playing to a domestic audience there. Trump obviously was heavily criticized, including by Biden, for being appearing far too friendly on an interpersonal level with various dictators, including Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. And so it seems like Biden's now, he's posturing as tough in order to strike that contrast. But I think it's self-defeating for a number of reasons. One, obviously the Putin regime is a murderous right-wing one, but it is a nuclear power. It's as the largest stockpile of nuclear weapons in the world. Relations between the US and Russia have been deteriorating for a long time. They're arguably worse than when they were during the Cold War, at least during the Cold War, because of the threat of constant war. There was some sort of systematized communication and diplomacy between the two countries, because they realized they had to work together to avoid the worst outcome. That doesn't really exist anymore. And you saw Biden, increasing. He put sanctions on Putin because of the Navalny incident. He's put sanctions on him again because of the SolarWinds hack. Which itself is a pretty dubious reason, given that the US boasts, at least anonymously to the press, that they do exactly the same kind of cyber espionage to Russia and Iran and other countries. So it feels more like, instead of a coherent foreign policy and with respect to those two countries, this is more kind of posturing for the benefit of domestic politics. In terms of some other things, I mean, one of Biden's biggest promises and one of the clearest contrasts that he made between himself and Trump during the campaign was, of course, Trump coddles dictators, and Biden was going to return the United States to this not really ever existing, but kind of nonetheless, in people's minds, this idea of the U.S. as a stalwart champion of human rights and democracy and so on and so forth around the world. I think it was always a bit naive to really believe that Biden was going to quite go to that, commit to that fantasy. However, I mean, the way that the Saudi crown prince was left the hook, for once the intelligence report came out that was released by the Biden administration, that he was personally involved in the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi, the selling of arms to Egypt's dictator. I mean, when Trump invited Sisi over to the US, it caused an uproar, and people said, this is a grave violation of everything America stands for. And now the Biden administration has been selling weapons to this dictator, who, just recently, there's been a lawsuit against one of his officials by a U.S. citizen and an Egyptian citizen, who was tortured by the Sisi regime. And this is someone that the weapons are being sold to. Worse, the Biden administration actually stepped in and basically moved to scuttle that lawsuit. They said, no, this person should be protected. So, I mean, there could be, I could name a bunch of other examples, but I think those just kind of give you an idea of how, on that particular front, the idea of returning the United States to this, at least a nominal kind of commitment to human rights and democracy, it really, that has not happened. And I'm surprised there hasn't been more pushback, frankly, because that was one of the things that was central to criticism of Trump. One other thing I will say as well, and I think this really needs to get far more outrage than it does, is Biden's continued refusal to support the waiver of patent rights on the COVID vaccine. Not only is that hugely unjust for so many people across the world, but it's also self-defeating. I mean, if the virus continues to spread in other parts of the world, even if the US and the Western world, the wealthiest parts of the world are protected, theoretically, you increase the risk of mutations that might end up being resistant to the vaccine, and that could end up wreaking havoc, down the line. So even from a practical standpoint, let alone just a kind of human rights standpoint, it doesn't really make a lot of sense why he's continuing to resist this.
Another area where the hypocrisy was front and center for me was yesterday after the verdict was announced, and there was the author of 2 crime bills, which we discussed extensively in our interview a year ago, Branko, the author of 2 crime bills, and Kamala Harris, California's top cop with her very bad record on racial justice, criminal justice, sitting there capitalizing on that verdict and talking with the family. He was saying, well, we have to get this George Floyd Policing Act passed. But David, you wrote about how that isn't even really a very transformative bill. All the things that it doesn't do and all the things that it would do that actually were in place. Can you elaborate a little bit about that and also talk about what Biden could do by executive action in this area?
Right. I mean, Derek Chauvin was wearing a body cam, and one of the major parts of the Justice and Policing Act would mandate body cams on police officers. So that's an example right there. We saw this recent death in Columbus, Ohio, where we have footage of it because the officer was wearing a body cam. I mean, that does not seem to be that much of a deterrent for the types of police-involved shootings that we keep seeing over and over again, particularly against Black youth. Similarly, New York City banned chokeholds in 1993, and 2 decades later, Eric Garner was choked to death. And of course, the Justice and Policing Bill would presumably or allegedly ban chokeholds. So this is it's kind of a bill that seeks to reform policing. It's a very reform-oriented measure rather than make some fundamental changes. So presumably there's going to be a process by which bipartisan support is going to be attempted to come together on this. So even what we have now, which is kind of just tweaks around the edges, is going to get even less impactful if anything is going to pass, because obviously you need because of the lockdown on the filibuster, you obviously need 10 Republican votes in the Senate to get anything done. As far as executive action, one of the more impactful things in the Justice and Policing Act would be an end to the 1033 program. And that is the program by which the US military gives surplus equipment to local police departments around the country. And billions of dollars in this equipment has gone to really militarize the police in the United States. And under President Obama, at the end of his term in like 2015, I think after the Ferguson situation, there was by executive order, a restriction on the delivery of that equipment. There was a presumption that Biden would restore that executive order in his first week in office, in fact, to end the 1033 program, or at least end the actual appropriation of those armaments and equipment from the Defense Department to these local police departments. And it didn't happen. And in the first quarter of 2021, something like $34 million in military equipment has gone to local police departments. So we have gridlock on the things that need to be done legislatively, and on the things that need to be done by executive action. You have lobbying from the police lobby to make sure nothing actually happens. So what are we really talking about when we're talking about a racial equity agenda? I mean, Biden talks about, changing hearts and minds. This is not the stuff of great transformative legislative action. So
Yeah. You know, the other thing that you've often stated he can do by executive action is deschedule marijuana from being a Schedule I drug. Now,
right.
I wanted to ask you, Branko, since you got into his history a little bit, I'm wondering why he has this attitude about marijuana. I mean, he's also fired famously campaign employees that he found out were smoking pot. His son has a drug problem. And I just read a really moving story about how he talks to his son every night. He keeps his son basically from going over the edge. This is according to Hunter Biden himself. Maybe he's just old enough that he literally thinks that marijuana is a gateway drug to these kind of hard drugs. But it's kind of, it's a very important racial justice initiative, don't you think? Why do you think he's so dead set against this?
Look, I mean, obviously, I can only speculate. Obviously, he himself is personally a teetotaler. Doesn't drink. Never did drugs. Supposedly, when he went on a date with a girl when he was a teenager, when she put a cigarette, he ended the date there and then. So there is part of that I think is ingrained in him. This attitude towards any sort of drug. Obviously, as well, he was one of the chief architects of the system of mass incarceration in the United States, which was largely based around drug use and drug dealing. My sense was always that was more of a kind of political thing, that he knew that he would get a political benefit from it. But, I think also there was an element that he really did believe that drugs were some sort of scourge on society at the time. Whether he still believes that, I would be surprised. The other thing that may play into it is that there is this fear of potentially maybe alienating certain conservative-minded voters, or inviting some sort of counterattack from Republicans, for being too liberal. Again, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, because at the end of the day, we just saw Trump voting states legalize marijuana, in this last election. So there's probably some combination of those. But I mean, yeah, you're right. I think it's a completely needless concern. I think in the same way that the issue of LGBT equality moved, miles and miles from where it was in, say, even the mid 2000s. I think on the issue of at least marijuana, people generally view the drug much differently than they did, even 20 years ago, let alone in Biden's time. And I think it would be a fairly uncontroversial, and in fact, actually pretty popular move if he did went some way towards allowing people to, at the very least, not be, punished severely, whether it's by going to rehab mandatorily, or it's something even worse, to allow people to use this drug without having to fear being in some way, having some sort of record, or losing their job, or being put in jail. It seems like a no-brainer to me, but who knows.
Dave, I want to talk about healthcare, because that's, I think, Americans' number one concern. Now, we know that he famously told Jake Tapper that even if Medicare for all managed to pass the House and the Senate, he would veto it. But he did support the public option. But I haven't heard him or anyone in his administration talking about the public option once in these 92 days. Talk to me about healthcare and also about drug pricing, because Senators Merkley, Warren, Sanders, and Booker have a new bill, or they want to ask the SARA to do something to lower drug pricing that you wrote about. So talk about the public option and drug pricing.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, that has not been on the agenda, and that's just been sort of pushed to the side and forgotten. I mean, you could say that the main effort from the Biden administration is a healthcare effort, right? It's the vaccine rollout. and improving the situation there is a public health imperative, and they have brought down the rate of death from people over the age of 65 by 80% during this first 100 days. So, I mean, there are positive things to say, and one of the most impactful things in the American Rescue Plan, which was the bill that was the COVID relief bill, reduced the out-of-pocket cost for premiums for people on the insurance exchanges for over the next 2 years, as well as paying for COBRA for people who lose their health insurance at work. It's a very inefficient way to go about this, but it does produce a net benefit for people beyond the status quo, which would be a much higher cost for health insurance. But you're right. I mean, there's healthcare bills are just sort of not on the radar screen right now. As far as drug prices go, there's a tremendous amount of authority there. It's, you know, there is a bill sort of floating out there that would allow the government to negotiate prescription drug prices in Medicare, which would be a step forward, although there are different iterations of that bill, and some of them are less robust than others. But what the president could do, what the Health and Human Service Secretary, Xavier Becerra, could do, includes using something called eminent domain for patents, where literally the HHS could seize drug patents if they're not being delivered on reasonable terms, in other words, affordable terms, and then distribute them to other drug makers who would agree to distribute those drugs affordably. There are other things that could be done in the healthcare space. We've seen this kind of tactic done before. In 2001, during the anthrax scare, the Tommy Thompson, the Republican Health and Human Services Secretary, threatened to take the patent for Cipro, which was the anti-anthrax drug, when there was a scare that there was this sending of things with white powder through the mail. And Bayer, who was the company that was making Cipro at the time, when they were threatened that their patent was going to be taken away, they radically reduced the price of the drug down to $1 a pill. So this works. We know it works, and Biden has not taken action, nor has HHS at this point on those ideas, and the pressure needs to be kept on.
There's another area I want to talk about before we run out of time. Two areas, actually: housing and the climate. So, Dave, you wrote about the eviction moratorium. He extended the eviction moratorium per, excuse me, per the CDC, but you saying it could be a lot better. Similarly, I want to see where you think this thing is going with public housing. In the infrastructure bill, he's proposing $40 billion for public housing. Schumer has a bill that he wants to propose $80 billion. He's gone way far to the left, possibly anticipating a primary challenge from AOC. I don't know. But AOC herself, in her Green New Deal, they have $120 billion public housing. Now, public housing has been really short-shifted in the last 40 years of neoliberalism, and that's really what we need. Depending on the private developer market to provide affordable housing for people has been an abject failure, in my opinion, has led to this huge homeless crisis that we're facing everywhere. Dave, I don't know if you read that the people in Brentwood now are upset because there's tents on San Vicente Boulevard. Oh my gosh.
Woe is them.
Yeah, I know, right? So it's like housing is a really important issue. And for us, I mean, I'm very excited. This is a longer thing that I'd love to have you come back on, because you wrote about industrial policy, which our country never has. It always reeked of something too communistic. Meanwhile, it works great in Germany. And you also wrote about privatization and the consultants and how they screw up everything, like the bullet train in California was the example they used. So we cannot let the private industry, corporations control these public goods and services anymore. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Right. So I don't know where to begin, but I'll be brief. As far as housing is concerned, I think the main thing in the American Jobs Plan, which is the first half of Biden's infrastructure bill, is this very short sentence that it talks about doing a competitive grant program for cities that change their land use policies. And this is very similar to what Obama did in the 2009 stimulus with a program called Race to the Top, where he dangled money to school districts that changed their education policies to make them, more friendly to charters and testing and firing bad teachers and things like that. Bad teachers. It was really reviled, I think, on the left as sort of a bribe for to put in these sort of anti-teacher policies. This is kind of a similar thing. It's dangling money so that cities will change their policies to add more upzoning, allow more houses to be built, things like that. Certainly there's going to be pushback to that on the left. There's certainly people on the left who also believe that we do need to build more housing, but a lot of people think it should be of the social housing variety. As you say, there's a pot of money there, but it might not be enough. I think that this competitive grant program, even though it's small, it's like $5 billion, the fact that a lot of cities might compete for it and change their policies would make it more impactful than the $5 billion that's actually handed out. So that's, I think, one of the key policies in housing. I think sort of hand in hand with housing is all the money that's going to transit, I think, in the American Jobs Plan, because presumably if you have a good transit backbone, you can build your housing in different parts of various communities and different parts of the metro area and still be able to get to work in a central business district or anything like that. And there's a ton of money for Amtrak and not just Amtrak, but inner city rail and things of that nature. But as you say, there's a ton of money in this American Jobs Plan, and a lot of it would, if done well, go to really good things. The question is, are consultants going to go in and steal all the money? I mean, we don't have a culture of long-term planning in the United States. We usually outsource that to very high-priced consulting firms like McKinsey or firms like that. We saw how it destroyed high-speed rail in California, which had consultant upon consultant upon consultant, and created cost overruns and created bad programs, bad planning, and ultimately created a plan that was supposed to go from San Francisco to Los Angeles, and now goes from in 7 years might go from Bakersfield to Merced, which is good for the 8 people who need to do that. Yeah, I mean, I think that we really have to guard against this amount of fiscal spending, which we don't normally do in the United States, from being captured by privatization, by corporatization, by the consultantocracy.
Well, listen, I'm going to ask my last question of Branko, because I know you have a hard out in 3 minutes. So I want to thank you very much for coming on the show. And I want to congratulate you again on your Hillman Prize.
Well, thank you very much. And good talking to you and you, Branko, as well.
Climate change. Okay. It's the issue that's the number one issue to me, because if we can't survive on the planet, it doesn't matter what our positions are on healthcare or gun control or racial justice or what have you. I did a show with Steve Horn when he was the climate reporter for the Real News Network about how Biden's climate plan and the DNC climate plan were written by the fossil fuel companies, because it involved a lot of fancy, unproven technologies such as enhanced oil recovery and carbon sequestration, which means we continue to drill, but we're going to sequester the carbon, so it won't be a problem, instead of just banning fracking and keeping it in the ground. So I know that we got back into the Paris Climate Accord, which is BS, because the targets are too low, they're too late, and it's voluntary, it's not even mandatory. But one thing Dave did right is that recently a very bad piece of news came out that the climate czar was not the good person whose name I didn't write down that, climate activists wanted, but some guy who is a green venture capitalist who used to work for private equity. So I don't know if you've written anything about it, but do you have any opinions on Biden and, the most existential crisis of our times, which is the climate crisis?
Yeah, well, I would say one thing, first of all, which is that I don't get the sense yet that the Biden administration, that really the people that run the US government truly see the climate as the greatest civilizational threat facing not just the United States, but the world. Obviously, China has basically really become the organizing principle for foreign policy of the Biden administration, just as it was for Trump, and to some extent, as it was for Obama towards the end of his second term. So that's the thing that they see as the chief priority and what they should be doing on the world stage is challenging the rise of China, preventing it from becoming a hegemonic power and supplanting the United States, which to me, it feels a lot like two people fighting over, a shrinking island. Who gets to be the last one on the foot square space with a tree on it? The fact is, what really should be happening is, rather than launching into this kind of pointless competition with China and starting a second Cold War just aimed at a country a little further south, there really needs to be more efforts to cooperate internationally, to use that as a organizing principle for the United States and really for the world going forward. I mean, obviously, look, you're not going to change the human rights records of countries like China or Russia overnight. But at the very least, there are certain things core to everyone's interests here that everyone can agree on. Number one being, we don't want the world to get too hot and cities to end up underwater and massive migrations of people. In terms of some of the specific stuff he's done, I mean, some of his early executive orders were encouraging. I mean, that was an encouraging thing. It really was. But, you read some of the fine print. And so the big thing that got people excited in his first few days was the pause on oil and gas leases on federal land, which sounds really good. But you look a little past just the initial media excitement, and you had industry people telling the Financial Times, phew, lucky. We thought this was going to be something much worse. That doesn't really matter. The leases aren't important. It's the permitting that's the real issue. And lo and behold, I think in the first 10 days or something, the Biden administration approved something like 30 permits. This infrastructure bill is really being sold as the way that the administration is going to confront climate change. And so it's supposed to be the evidence of its commitment to the issue. And again, once it pairs the competition with China as one of the main goals of the bill alongside climate change. And in reality, the actual climate change part of the infrastructure bill is not that big. I mean, it might be more than other administrations, but compared to what actually has to happen to prevent the climate crisis from getting worse and all manner of horrors from happening, it's not really there. I think there's something like $125 billion for climate change, basically over 8 years. That's well below what groups like Sunrise are calling for. They want $1 trillion every year, and that really is, I mean, to completely overhaul the United States energy system and wean it off fossil fuels, make it rely purely on green tech. That is around what you have to do. So it's very, very disappointing. It's like I said at the start of the show, it's one of these things where Democratic administrations and politicians, they have this tendency to go, as long as I'm ahead of the last guy, that's really the most important thing. But what we need is not just someone who's a little more progressive than Obama was. We need something that is far, far more radical. I guess we'll see. Perhaps something can happen depending on what happens in the midterms if the Democrats are able to hold on to their seats, God forbid even maybe increase their seats. So I think that is very, very a very distant possibility. But who knows? It just seems like with Biden we're not going to get the kind of movement on this issue, at least at the present time, that we were really hoping for and that the world really needs.
Yeah, I think Bernie Sanders got it, and Biden may have just paid lip service to it. Well, tell people where they can follow you.
You can find me on Twitter at BMARCHETICH, or you can find me at Jacobin magazine, as well as you can, a lot of other great writers at Jacobin too, and occasionally at In These Times.
Great. Thank you so much, Branko. I really appreciate your being on the show again, and I'm going to say goodbye to you so that I can promote tomorrow night's show. Tomorrow night, I'm going to be interviewing activist Callie Warner from Asheville, where I've moved. It's going to be a locally focused show, and we're going to be talking about her organization, Grow Wise Buncombe. Buncombe County is the county that Asheville is in. And she's going to be talking about fighting irresponsible development. So I hope that people tune in. It doesn't just apply to Asheville. Obviously, we have irresponsible development going on all over this country. So I want to thank you again for watching. Please share this show. So stay safe, keep wearing your masks until we've gotten herd immunity, and keep fighting.